Good day, everyone. I'm Harish Manadyar, and welcome to Executive Insights by Shipping and Freight Resource. For those of you who might not be aware, Shipping and Freight Resource is the definitive online resource for industry, providing content, news, market intelligence, and industry insights such as this. Today, we have Hannah Nguyen, Director of Digital Ecosystems and Digital Standards Initiative with the International Chamber of Commerce. Good afternoon, Hannah, and thank you for your time today. Could you give a brief about your background and your current role?
Thank you, Harish. First of all, thank you so much for giving us the opportunity for the ICC Digital Standards Initiative to come about today to share about some of the things that we are doing that would benefit the shipping and freight community. So a few words about myself. My name is Hannah. I'm based out of the the ICC Singapore hub. And we have a small team with a big mission to accelerate the digitalization of world's international trade and supply chain. So my background is a little bit connected to our community that we have here. So in a not too long distant past, I was also in the world of freight forwarding and logistics, spent 10 years in the commodity logistics supply chain. So living a lot of the day-to-day operations and also the pain points of the physical supply chain, which is very much still heavily paper-based. And so when I moved on to this role, engaging the digital ecosystems of international trade and supply chain at the Digital Standards Initiative, my main concern and focus is really to harmonize the standards that can really remove the pain points as freight and logistic players within the supply chain go digital. So that's really where my focus is. Thank you.
That's a great initiative and a great role that you're playing. A lot has been spoken and written about paperless trade, and in fact, you recently wrote and released standards toolkit for cross-border paperless trade. What was the catalyst for this document and the basis for its creation?
Thanks so much for the question. And I'd like to echo what you mentioned, that a lot has been said and done around the topic of paperless trade. But however, when we scan the literature and the coverage of contents in this topic, a lot has been centered around national single windows and all of those customs related processes and documents. But there's a lot more, as you know very well, that is going on in the world of physical supply chains. And so when we look at the world of physical processes, especially around shipping and freight processes, there's a lot of standards that actually can help the digitalization of many of those paper documents. So we're talking about things like bills of lading, warehouse receipts, for instance, of course, all those processes and documents that have been floating around. And so when we talk about, how to accelerate this trade and supply chain digitization, we have entered into many conversations where people say, look, I really want to digitalize, but I don't know what are the standards I can use to make sure that I use the same standard and dictionary as my counterparts. Let's say from a shipper to a freight forwarder, from a freight forwarder to an ocean carrier, how do I have that same language? And so we started telling them, look, these are the few standards that you can use. And people were like, wow, thank you so much for telling us. And we discovered that this is a gap in knowledge, and perhaps it's a perception issue where people think that there are not a lot of standards that they can leverage, when in fact there are a lot. So that was where we first started with the impetus behind making a go-to guide that didn't exist before in order to equip market players, especially industry players, but also governments and customs and border agencies, how to have this common language. And so that is where I team up with our partner at the World Trade Organization, Emmanuel Gunn, to actually create this standards toolkit for cross-border paperless trade. And we have been so heartened by the warm reception that we have had since its launch 2 months ago.
Yeah, that's great news indeed, and I think it's very timely as well. But I'm sure you face some challenges getting the industry to accept it. What are some of the challenges that the ICC is seeing, or you as the Standards Initiative is seeing to accelerate digitalization?
Yeah, it goes back to the very core mission of why the Digital Standards Initiative was set up in 2020, right in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. And as we are still emerging out of that, I think it's even more timely now that we accelerate the work that we are doing. So since the beginning, we have recognized that there have been so many players, so many people working at this issue and challenge and opportunities as represented by trade digitization. For so many years, we have been talking about, digitalization of the bills of lading, for instance. So I think we have all been here long enough to know that it has been a journey where there was one, for example, service provider who is able to, make an electronic bills of lading, and then there were two, and then there were a few, and then there are now more than 10, I think, right?
Sure.
Different variations.
Yeah.
But still, there is also a consensus among market participants that there is still a digital islands issue where people have been working in silos and optimizing in silos. So there is a constraint inherent in that working mechanism when you can really make things a little bit better for yourself and for those people that you are connected with in that mini ecosystem. But you can't have the benefits of scale because nobody can connect to all of the multiple digital islands that exist out there. So the very mission that we are set up with and what we are focused on doing every day is really getting industry to work together. And I think we have had some great success over there where, within the first 9 months of our existence, we managed to set up an industry advisory board that comprised of 30 industry leaders. And this is the first time where we are able to see around the same table, we have the full participation from the supply chain actors. So we have not only importers, exporters, but also freight forwarders, ocean carriers, ports, customs, the standards development organizations that make standards for those users, all sitting down there, and also the financial supply chain that makes use of all those information coming out from the physical supply chain. So we have banks, insurers, credit insurers, all looking at the same thing and say, look, how can we share the data better? How can we trust the data being shared among each other? And how do we ensure interoperability? So this is one example where I think the challenges are there, but we are taking a lot of steps in order to address those.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the subject of trust as well, because I'm sure there's a lot of issues behind that and a lot of doubts, especially with regards to security measures. So what are some of the security measures and safeguards that this initiative has to sort of ensure that data integrity is maintained, because it's going to be shared across the ecosystem? So there must be some safeguards and safety measures in place.
Yeah, sure. I think this is a very important consideration, of course, and I would just like to remind ourselves and our audience that in the existing world that we operate in, which is still heavily paper-based world, with 4 billion pieces of paper flying around as we talk, right? In that world, inherently there's a lot of risk
Sure.
Because as we go and exchange paper and trying to trust all the information that is on that pieces of paper, we have all seen throughout these few years quite a few high-profile scandals which are related to papers being used in shipping and freight. For instance, fake bills of lading or maybe fraudulent warehouse receipts, for various commodities, and also other perhaps not so high-profile cases that many of us may experience ourselves, but do not make it to the newspaper. So this is the real problem that everybody knows, right? So paper inherently have their risk in terms of data integrity, because you can have always ways to go around, faking a piece of data, or maybe the signature or the stamp of authority that is actually on that. So as we move to digital, I think this is where we have opportunity to do things actually slightly better, if not a lot better. So depending on the technology that we use and the design of the ecosystem, I think when we go digital, there are many standards and frameworks that actually can address some of those issues. So for instance, I give you 2 examples. For example, when I was not too long ago in that world, looking at, authorized signatures that may go into certain documents, right? So as a freight forwarder, you rely on that, for instance, maybe from a cargo owner or from a bank. So you really have to, take a look at the list of signatures and the thing that you have in front of you on that document, and make that very human judgment of whether it looks the same or not. And that can be a variation. But there are technologies, for example, verifiable credentials, which is the VLEI, one of the standards that we advocate for in our standards toolkit that we mentioned earlier. This is an excellent example where instead of relying on your eyes, technology can help you to know that, okay, Harish is the authorized signatory of this particular company, and he's authorized in his functional role as XYZ to sign this particular document. And that is something that you don't have to make a judgment on. There is something that technology can assist with to know that this was actually signed by that authorized signatory. Another example I can give you is this interoperable framework that we also highlighted as part of that standards toolkit, the trade trust framework. This is a framework which is open source and a publicly freely available utility where you are able to ascertain whether the piece of paper that was shared to you, now in digital format, maybe it's a PDF format, Excel format, doesn't matter, that was actually sent to you and you receive it, it's not tampered with. It's still the same as per the latest version from the source, from the creator. So there's a way for you to actually ascertain that data authenticity. So this is two examples that I just want to highlight to say that, it doesn't mean that when we go digital, the risk increase. Of course, the risk will still be there somewhere, because in every commercial business endeavor, in any process, what kind of technology you use, there will still be some residual risk somewhere. But if we just compare paper and digital side by side, there are opportunities to arrest some of the problems inherent in the paper-based process.
Yeah, but there are some that would argue that with the digitalization, you are also prone to risk of cybercrime, cyber attacks, and those have happened also recently, as you know. So what is the methodology for to handle that when there's a large scale adoption of standards, when everybody starts going that route? How would that be handled?
Thanks for that question. And again, I would actually highlight that the large scale adoption of standards may not and should not inherently make it riskier in terms of what you mentioned, the incidences of cybercrime and cyber attacks. In fact, in the status quo that we are having today, if we send each other an attachment on email or any link that we share on email, that risk remains there already, right? So let's say if the link is unsafe, if there's a phishing attempt, if somebody is forging my email logins, the risk is already there. There's nothing new here. But if we were to look at a systems approach in terms of going digital and exchanging data within a trusted technology environment, and again, that is a large world that perhaps we don't have time to go into details today, but I think there are a lot of thinking and a lot of design that goes into making digital systems a lot more resilient. So I do have a lot of faith in all the technologies out there that are looking at this, and knowing that actually, if we all adopt the higher threshold of standards, we actually minimize the risk of such penetration, of such attacks in the future, because we would all be migrating to a higher level of security. And a large part of that, I would go back to the example of digital identity. Right? If we are able to all go for certain industry standards in terms of digital identity and having that recognized across the ecosystem, it's not only easier to verify each other's where that data comes from, whether it's authentic, whether I can trust you, that source information, but also it increase the level of security, because all of this would be aligned at a higher threshold.
So it's not like it's not something like the world was worried that the world is going to collapse in Y2K. It's not something like that.
I really don't think so. Yeah. And in fact, like I say, we have all been relying on paper. And as we speak, millions of people are exchanging PDF scans of whatever paper document that they have. And that is the existing world that we have. If we don't go digital systematically, that world still continues. It's not any safer than it would be. Right? It's just inefficient, that's all. So now we have opportunity to make it a lot more efficient and also a lot safer.
Yeah, and since the adoption of the MLETR, I see that's the model on electronic transferable records. I see there's not many countries that have adopted this as part of their legislation or incorporated into their law. I think there's only about 6 or 7 countries at the moment, but none of those are the major key trading countries. Is there any reason or reluctance for this, and what is being done from the ICC for this adoption?
Thanks for that. That is really I would say half of the mission of the DSI, because on one part of our initiative, we really are focused on harmonizing standards. But on the other half of the initiative, which is actually spearheaded by my colleague Raul, based in New York, our Deputy Director of Legal Reform, we are laser focused on advocating for the model law on electronic transferable records from UNCITRAL. And I think, to be fair, in terms of the scale of history, UNCITRAL has been the advocate for a lot of model laws that have been adopted by many countries around the world. And one example of that would be, of course, the model laws on electronic signatures, but also the model law on electronic commerce. So those are the things that actually underline a lot of the transactions that you and I experiences every day, right? So we are all so used to e-commerce and e-shopping, and we wouldn't have known, but behind the background, because of the adoption of more than hundreds of countries around the world around this model law, it makes it so seamless for you and I to go shopping on whether it's Alibaba or any other e-commerce platform that you can think of around the world, Amazon, anything. So that adoption journey of that e-commerce related model law took a while as well to take off, just like anything that you could think of in this world. So the MLETR that we're talking about for electronic transferable records is a pretty young model law. It was finalized in 2017. Yeah. And I think as of now, we have 7 jurisdictions that have already adopted that. And that was in the space of 2 years. And this year, I think just 2 weeks ago, we see a very important announcement coming out from the UK. Government. Yes, correct. Because of the Queen's speech, where there's a bunch of bills being considered in Parliament, and part of that is a proposal to address this particular paper-based issues, to actually upgrade the law of the UK to be aligned with the modern age, so that not only paper-based bills of lading, for instance, are recognized, but also their digital counterparts. And while that bill is going through their process in the Parliament, it's not adopted yet. So yes, the UK is not in that list of 7 existing countries that adopted MLETR, but I think that is a very welcoming sign, because the UK obviously is the leading indicator in the world of commerce. And also we see the continuous commitment from the G7, from the UK presidency of last year to this year. We move on to the German presidency. We have seen 2 announcements from the ministers of the G7 with their commitment explicitly to say, look, we need an aligned framework, and we need to adhere to the principles that is actually, being advocated for in this model law. So I think this is a very welcoming sign that we will see a lot more of the leading trade nations actually spearheading the way in this adoption. And to your second question, what is being done at the DSI regarding this pillar work? We have constructed a legal reform advisory board, and this comprises of a different set of stakeholders, where we have the ICC national committees working together with international organizations like UNCITRAL, UNESCAP, and also a lot of the intercontinental free trade agreement regional bodies, as well as multilateral development banks. So what is important about this construct is that it allows everyone to accelerate the legal reform work needed. So ranging from advocacy to actually looking at local laws, which part of it needs to be updated so that it can be aligned to this model law. So that is a journey, but because of this advisory board that we have constructed, we are very hopeful that we will be able to make it to, tens to hundreds of countries within a much shorter amount of time.
I'm sure the UK's involvement is it's going to be very powerful, and if they adopt it, I'm sure there's many other countries that would follow, especially from the Commonwealth, I would suppose. But coming to the last question, a lot of people have been saying, yeah, all this is well and good, but are these solutions that you are suggesting, are these practical solutions to address the issues that we've been seeing, especially with supply chain disruptions? Pandemic, of course, nobody expected, but that was one of the, I think, a catalyst for many such initiatives in the technology space. So the big question from many of the people is, are these practical solutions to the problems that we are facing in the supply chain currently?
Thanks for that. I think the issues that we have been tackling would be the ones that underline the systemic issues that we need to solve in order to address the supply chain disruptions. And again, like you mentioned, it could come from future pandemics. It could come from, logistical bottlenecks that happen anywhere, a ship getting stuck in the middle of a canal, or maybe geopolitical events and conflicts. All of that can happen anywhere, right? In a bigger or smaller scale, in recurring sequence. So I think through all of this, we have all known that we need to make the supply chain more resilient. We need to make them a lot more transparent. We need to have the visibility and real-time communication and data analytics in order to make the decision-making and resource allocation much better. So how do we actually do that? We need to be able to bring the data, which is now again stuck in physical documentation and processes, or maybe in siloed machines, to be able to bring that to the ecosystem level, right? So let's say if a delay is from a shipper to the freight forwarder, to the ocean carrier, or maybe at the harbor site, you know where exactly the problem is. You will know where exactly that container is, right? You would know who is responsible for what. You would know where that supply chain is kind of stuck, at this particular moment in time. And not only that, because of that layer, besides enabling that supply chain resilience, you would enable more people to participate in the supply chain, and while also decreasing the cost and complexity that is involved in that participation. So that we are talking about, involvement of SMEs, of more diverse communities, economic actors, able to actually participate where they otherwise would not have, because of all the complexities and costs that were part of the existing heavily paper-based system.
Well, Hannah, that's all we have time for today. Thank you very much for your time, and hopefully we'll see that all your efforts are bearing fruit soon, and we see a mass adoption of these standards, which definitely will benefit everybody. Thank you very much again for taking part in the Executive Insights for Shipping and Freight Resource.
Thank you so much again for the opportunity, and it was such a great pleasure to be addressing this community once again.